So what we're going to talk about is at what cost unity, okay? And basically there's an idea of unity, and then there's the idea of issues in terms of unity. And this is an issue right now in terms of Eretz Yisrael. The disunity in Israel is now leading to a possible third election. And who knows what's going on from there and so forth. But the fact is you have this friction that exists. And
is that political or religious unity, though?
There's issues both ways.
Mm-hmm.
There's issues both ways. That's one of the ideas of what causes the disunity within the group, and then the question is at what cost unity. Okay, and the point is that there's this concept of Jewish unity, and then there's concept of the fact that maybe there's limits on Jewish unity. I think the classic example of that in terms of expressing this would be the idea of Shimshon Hirsch. Because when you take something like Shimshon Hirsch, you're not taking some, right-wing religious, you want to say Haredi, or saying, okay, this is it. You're taking a person who's identified as a founder of modern Orthodoxy, okay, and Shimshon Hirsch was, he respected secular studies. You're talking about someone who respected secular studies, and the fact is that one of the things with Shimshon Hirsch was his position on Jewish unity, because the fact is what he did is he challenged the unity of the Jewish communities in Germany in establishing a distinct Orthodox community in Frankfurt, in the US, right? The point is a lot of people don't recognize that, but that in terms of German Orthodoxy, there are actually two schools of German modern Orthodoxy. One is the Hirschian school, and the other one is the Berlin school. There's a Frankfurt school and there's a Berlin school. There are two distinct ideas of how to relate to secular studies. And they're both marked by scholarship. And the Frankfurt school is obviously the Hirschian school, and it was very much of, we will outreach to Jews who are not observant and so forth and so forth, but we will have nothing to do with any non-Orthodox understanding of Jewishness. So Shimshon Hirsch basically would have nothing to do with the Reform movement. He would not relate to it, and that's why he founded the Frankfurt school, the Frankfurt idea, which was it became a separate Jewish community. They separated from the normative Jewish community, which was then mostly in the hands of the Reform, and basically said, we're going to be separate. And this is developed in Mark Shapiro's book on the 3D age. There's some things about it. I'll talk about the 3D age in a sec. But the fact is, I think it's Mark Shapiro's book on the 3D age, is that the fact is that Shimshon Hirsch was very adamant but having nothing to do with any formalized form of the Jewish community. So he would be very much against being involved with UJA if it was around. The Hirschians would have nothing to do with UJA or anything like that. And furthermore, it's interesting that in terms of the establishment of the World Zionist Organization and so forth, Mizrahi, then you have to bring in the concept of Mizrahi, and that leads to the concept of understandings of the Raya Cook and so forth. But the fact is Mizrahi basically said we can relate to the World Zionist Organization. Agudas Yisrael would have nothing to do with the World Zionist Organization. A lot of people think that was because of the influence of the Polish Orthodox. Okay, there was a Hasidim were very much having any involvement with the with the World Zionist Organization. The real people who pushed for it was the Hirschians, who were very much involved in the Aguda and said, if you join with the World Zionist Organization, we're pulling out of Aguda.
Because it was a secular organization.
Because with secular, they would have nothing to do with a non-Orthodox organization. They have things to do with non-Orthodox individuals, but nothing to do with any organized definition of Jewishness. The interesting story, I think it's brought down by Mark Shapiro, for example, of how adamant Rosh Hashanah was about this, was that there was discussion in the 1800s of banning Shechita in Germany. Okay, and whatever the reasons were and so forth. So this was obviously a big political issue and so forth and so forth. And there was a Reform rabbi who really went in defense of Shechita. He sent a letter to a member of the German parliament arguing how Shechita is humane and worthwhile and so forth. And he was really trying to defend the Orthodox right to Shechita, Reform rabbi. Okay, and the story is told that when Rabbi Shimshon first found out about this Reform rabbi sending a letter to this member of the German parliament in favor of Shechita, he was ready to run over. He was ready to run over and tell this German politician that anything this rabbi says, just ignore and just attack it and so forth and so forth. And he was on his way out of his house, and his family held him back. Shimshon Hirsch was so, I remember reading the story, he was so adamant, we can't have any involvement of the reform or something like that, and other things, and he was basically, they had to hold him back for a guy who was defending Shechita. Anyways, but the point is that was a very strong attitude. Now that reflects the attitude that unity, that idea is unity, but it has to be unity within the definition of Torah. It can't be just unity for the sake of just so the question is now, in the opposite effect of that is the Berlin School. The Berlin School had a different perspective of modern Orthodoxy. First of all, it had a different perspective in terms of secular studies. One of the big issues was the secular study of Judaism, okay, in terms of being an academic in the secular study of Judaism, right? So Shimshon Hirsch had no patience for that. Torah is Torah. He was okay with you studying science. He was okay with you actually studying poetry. There were certain German poets that he loved and so forth. He wasn't so crazy with the study of German philosophy, though supposedly he knew aspects of German philosophy, Kant or whatever. But he wasn't so great about that because it could lead to real problems with Torah study and so forth. But he had a very specific allowance for the study of secular studies. The Berlin School was much more open. And the Berlin School also had a recognition of the value of the academic study of Jewish sources, which was obviously promoted by the academics and the non-Orthodox. Okay, what was it? Wissenschaft, the Judentis, I think it's called. But the fact of the matter is that the Berlin School was very accepting. So two of the leaders of the Berlin School were actually also recognized as scholars within the academic realm of Jewish studies. So there were three leaders of the Berlin School. Okay, the Berlin School was marked by what was called the Hildesheimer Seminary. Okay, so the first founder was Rav Israel Hildesheimer. Okay. The second founder was Rav David Tzvi Hoffman. David Tzvi Hoffman was a posek, big time chacham, but also recognized as in the world of academic study of Jewish sources, where he actually knew the world of what you would call biblical scholarship and so forth. And of course, the other head of the Berlin School was the Sridei Eish, Chil Yaakov Weinberg, who was known by his sefer, the Sridei Eish. All of you see a very, very big posek, okay, accepted by everyone within the Orthodox world as a very big posek, but also recognized as a scholar of Jewish studies in the academic world. Okay, in other words, in the academic, there's actually issues that when the Sridei Eish passed away, the Sridei Eish is somewhat of a sad story. The Sridei Eish was the head of the Hildesheimer Yeshiva, the Hildesheimer Seminary in Berlin in the 30s, and he saw what was going on in Germany, but he didn't think Hitler was really as bad as Hitler really was, because the Sridei Eish was a fan of Mussolini. Mussolini wrote books on fascism, and the Sridei Eish thought that the ideas of fascism as a system, not anti-Semitic, but as a political system, had value. Now, do you know another famous Jew who seemed to reflect some attitudes of fascism? Zev Jabotinsky. Okay, so the point is he was also. The fact is that at the time, fascism was another form of government, of political system, which is more to the right. Hitler tied fascism to anti-Semitism. Okay, so having read much more about, because Mussolini himself was not necessarily an anti-Semite until Hitler made him into an anti-Semite. The fact is, I think he actually had a son-in-law who was Jewish or something like that. But I don't know if that, but supposedly many Jews in Italy were members of the fascist party in Italy, and if when the Germans tried to push the Italians to be anti-Semitic, if you were a member of the fascist party, none of these anti-Semitic rules applied to you, because there were so many Jews who were members of the Italian fascist party. Anyways, but the point is okay. Then Mussolini gave in to Hitler after a while. But the point is that it's interesting, because if you think in terms of Italians, you don't think of Italians as anti-Semites. Like we don't have any lingering bad feelings to Italians. But we're always cautious about Germans. Okay, but the thing is that Sridei Eish was a fan of Mussolini's thought and so forth, and he sadly and unfortunately believed that Hitler was only anti-Semitic for political purposes, to try and get more votes, because so much of Germany was anti-Semitic. And then when he finally figured out that Hitler was who he was, Himashimo, it really was sad for the Sridei Eish. He actually spent the war in what's that concentration camp, which was the fake, where they used to go to the Yeah, so he actually spent the war in Theresienstadt. The reason he got because he was actually a Lithuanian national, because he came from Lithuania, and then so he was able to live in Theresienstadt, which obviously was not a good place to be, but he did know what was happening and then after the war, he was crushed because he felt he should have done more. There was issues, but he felt he could have done more, and he made a terrible mistake in not recognizing the absolute anti-Semitism of Hitler right away. Anyways, but he died. Then he moved to Switzerland. And he died in Switzerland, and I started the story because after that, when he died, he was taken to Israel for burial, and there was a whole big argument of who was going to bury him. Okay, Frum wanted to bury him because he was the Sridei Eish, so the Frum wanted to bury him. But the thing is the academics, the Jewish academics, wanted to be involved in his burial because he was, big man in the world of Jewish academia. Anyways, but the fact is that there was this issue of how you relate to the non-Orthodox, and that was part of the issue. Shimshon Farer said, "I value all Jews," but he was involved in, and that's obviously from the fact of the outreach to everyone and so forth. But I don't value any non-Jewish, any expression of Jewishness that is not from Torah. He was very adamant about that. Okay, in fact, actually arguing that I will not have anything to do with any organization of that nature, and I'll promote this, separation rather than connect. On the other hand, you had other people willing to try and relate, which was the Berlin School. In Frankfurt also, you had issues where there were, I forget, there was a Rav in Frankfurt who was also, not a nobody, who basically said, we still got to connect with the general Jewish community. And then, of course, you had the Raya Cook, who basically connected with the Zionist community in Eretz Israel, very much. He was involved with Hebrew U, he was involved with this and so forth and so forth.
Not just this,
Right.
but also he was called upon to officiate at Levayot, at
Right.
funerals.
Right.
And he had to find a way within his heart, within his being, within
Yes.
his orthodoxy, to be able to say Hespedim
Right.
for people who denied
Right.
observance of
Right.
Judaism.
I heard someone once told me, you got to read Rav Kook's Hesped for Herzl.
Mhm.
It's remarkable
Oh my.
because Herzl is the
Epitome, yeah.
epitome of a you want to say a secular Jew. He had no recognition or value of Jewish thought, and Herzl himself really wasn't involved in any type of Jewish thought. You have to understand, people like Ben Gurion. There's an interesting side with someone like Ben Gurion. Ben Gurion himself was a biblical scholar. Okay. Ben Gurion was really an expert in Tanakh. You know the Chidona Tanakh they have in Israel these days? Okay, everyone. Okay, now it's basically the big people in the Chidona Tanakh are basically, Dati Leumi people are usually the people involved, right? The Mizrahi type Jew, the Dati Leumi and so forth. The fact is, there's another problem because there's another type of person who also really, really knows Tanakh. Okay, and they want to do the Chidon Tanakh. And who are these Jews who really, really know the Bible?
Messianics.
That's right. So the fact is, there was an issue like this a couple of years ago, where one of the finalists was a Jews for Jesus type person, and they didn't know what to do. But the fact of the matter is the Chidon Tanakh was not started by the religious. Who started the Chidon Tanakh? It was the early secularist Jews. Why? Because secular Zionism was very much tied to the value of the Bible. Okay, so the point is that there were theorists. Achad was the great philosopher of Zionist Judaism. Achad was not religious, but basically came out with a lot of interesting thoughts in the philosophy of the Bible. And David Ben Gurion was a scholar of Tanakh. And Chidon became big in Eretz Israel because the originators of it came from the secular community. Okay, in terms of how you have to know Tanakh. They didn't want you to know any Gemara, they want you to know Tanakh.
It was taught in schools, it was part of the curriculum.
Yeah, but especially...
But as a secular subject, not as a religious subject.
No, and you're exactly right. It was
Historia.
Yes.
It was Historia. It may have been like Aesop's fables, but it was the expression of the values of Jewishness. But you have to understand, it was the expression of the values of Judaism just from the Tanakh, from the verses. Okay, and if you study the verses by itself without the Torah Sheba'al Peh, it's a very different idea. Okay, so the truth is that when the Zionist Jews studied Tanakh, their heroes were Shimshon, a Gibor, right? David HaMelech, and with all the aspects of David HaMelech in terms of the way he was as presented in the Tanakh, which was
Human,
which was much more human. But you had ideas of that, okay, and if they read things like Yoshiyahu and Yirmiyah, they read it in terms of not the spiritual, but the expression of Jewish yearnings and stuff like that. But it was very much that idea and so forth, and it was a different definition than the definition of a of orthodoxy in that regard. That was interesting.
Which is interesting, though, because the characters that they were talking about were observant Jews.
Yeah, but as we have to understand that, as they understood what it meant to be observant Jews, which is not the way we understand. I mean, we look back at them and see them as observant Jews as we understand observant Jews, but the fact is that if you speak to these people, they say that they. Even something like I think Moshe Rabbeinu walked around with tefillin. It says right in the Chumash, "Shatam lo ta'idecha," put a sign on your arm. So let's say that doesn't mean tefillin. Tefillin was years later. It just means he put some kind of sign on his arm to reflect the fact that he was a believer. The fact is that we take things
like a tattoo, or
it could have been. They could possibly say that. In other words, when they
Interesting thought.
we don't recognize that
How different everything is without the Talmud.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the fact is we don't recognize how we're really a Talmud-based religion. We're not a Bible religion. The fact is, I always like to quote this. Shimshon Hirsch has an interesting way of expressing the relationship between Torah Shabbat and Torah Shabbat, between the oral law and the written law. Most people talk about the written law, and then it's a commentary and so forth and so forth. When you talk commentary, rabbis and so forth. Shimshon Hirsch has a nice way of putting it in his commentary on Parshas Mishpatim, where he says that it was a lecture by HaKadosh Baruch Hu to Moshe Rabbeinu. And then, he'll take these terms, and then Moshe said, okay, let's have some crib notes to make
notes.
to make you remember the lecture, right? And the notes to make you remember the lecture. When you write notes to make you remember, you don't write the lecture. It's compact and you use little things. You're talking about a car, so a bad car, so you put the word lemon and stuff like that. The point is that, and that's why Shofar understands it. You have to understand that it's not that you're going from the text to try and expand to understand, beyond the text. It's the lecture, and the text is the way to remember the mnemonic to remember the lecture. Okay,
including a bunch of idioms that were common at the
right.
time, which were not common later,
or whatever. The point is that it's a completely different perspective, and therefore it comes out completely differently in terms of understanding the ideas, and so forth. And also the idea of what's in Torah Shabbat Peh is not, like so many times as a rabbi you say, well, what's the verse that backs it up? There's no verse. It's a Gemara. Oh, so it's from the rabbis. No, it's part of Torah. Okay, it doesn't have a verse, and people say, well, how significant
Where'd it
a
come
verse?
from?
Doesn't matter. The point is, and you get that all the time. I just had that in my shirt this morning, where a person started quoting a verse, and I sort of said, don't go there, because that verse gives implications that I'm not saying in the shir, okay? Because Torah Shabbat Peh is much more intimate. Now, the truth is, this also leads back to something with that Jews for Jesus person. Years ago, I like telling the story even though it's a little bit self-deprecating. Years ago, in the 90s, I believe, myself and NISHMA and Jews for Judaism in town had a program. We brought in a gentleman by the name of J. David Davis. Have you ever heard the name J. David Davis?
The pastor from the South?
Well, pastor is, but pastor, he would like to be
he
called
was
pastor
in
now.
Noahide,
Okay.
right?
Okay, right. J. David Davis was a Baptist minister
Oh, sorry.
who lived in Athens, Georgia.
Yeah.
Okay, and he started questioning things about the Bible and so forth
Right.
and so forth. So eventually,
It was a
he-
church of mine.
yes, okay. So eventually, he went up to the top of his Baptist church, and he took down the cross, and it's no longer the Emmanuel Baptist Church; it was just the Emmanuel. Okay, and he became a Noahide. Became this public Noahide. It was written about in the Wall Street Journal and so forth and so forth. So myself and Julia said, hey, let's bring him in to speak. Okay, so we actually had some interesting programs with him. We had a big program Sunday night at Shar Shemayim, okay, and then we had another program at the North York Public Library, okay, on Monday night, we had him on Sunday night at Shar Shemayim, and Monday night at North York Public Library. Okay. And our idea of doing that was Shar Shemayim would be for Jews, and the North York Public Library would be for non-Jews. You know, didn't necessarily work out like that, but the fact of the matter is okay. But and it was interesting because Shar Shemayim, okay, I made the decision that David, we called David, J. David, we called David, should not wear a kippah when he spoke at Shar Shemayim in the sanctuary. Why? Because don't give anyone the idea that he wasn't Jewish. And we want to make it clear that he's not Jewish. And he's an Ochai, doesn't have to wear a kippah. It's also a funny story because he actually came in on Shabbos. Okay? And it's like because...
You wanted to meet him at the airport?
The program, because we had a special program for educators Saturday night, a private program for Jewish educators who ever wanted to meet him from education and so forth. So then the question, then we started talking, okay, but where would he spend Shabbos and so forth? He says, and I was on the phone with whoever he was talking to. I think it might have been right. Anyways, he said, what's the problem? I'll just fly in on Shabbos, okay, and I'll take a cab from the airport. Okay, because he can.
Because he can, yeah.
Because he can.
And it was really funny because so he came in on Shabbos and so forth, and like because he was a no-chai, The fact is, but anyways, the point is on Monday night at this program, we had a good number of non-Jews come in, some of them who were really questioning and had issues and so forth and so forth. So and the people there knew I was the I was one of the organizers and the rabbi and so forth and so forth. So after the evening there, David was having this whole discussion with this non-Jew on verses in the Tanakh, right, going back and forth and so forth and so forth. And I had to be silent to the side. So the non-Jew who David was arguing about, he said, hey, the rabbi's right there, why don't we just ask him? So David sits there and says, he's a rabbi, he doesn't know anything about Bible, ask him Talmud. And this guy was like, what are you talking about? He says, Rabbi, is that true? And I said, yeah, David's right. You can ask me more questions about Talmud than you can ask me about Bible. In fact, they were going back and forth with certain verses. I can tell you, Baruch Hashem, one time I had to actually argue with some people about something. Luckily there are rabbis who know Tanakh, so Rabbi Skomak knows Tanakh and stuff like that. But the fact is I know one situation where I actually got confronted by a guy. And it just so happened that for some reason I happen to know Psukim and Daniel. And this guy confronted me with these Psukim and Daniel. And basically I was able to come back. I was able to just respond and at the end said, you're right. It doesn't go my way of just thought this. I said, well, look at the verses and say like this. And I always felt Baruch Hashem that this was going to happen, and I knew these Psukim and Daniel. But the fact is that we're talking about in Israel, but Theodore Herzl I don't know how much he even read of Chara'am. Like he was totally political Zionism. Like Ben Gurion was a Tanakh scholar and so forth. Didn't help his Frumkeit so much, but the fact of the matter is that he anyways.
It didn't help with his Frumkeit, but it helped with the Frumkeit of the country, because he related and made sure that.
The fact is there's an interesting issue of how Ben Gurion related to the Chazon Ish. There's some people who basically try and argue that the Chazon Ish didn't ever want to talk to him and so forth and so forth. There's other people who argue that the Chazon Ish no Tanakh. People think that these great Talmudic scholars, the fact of the matter is the Chazon Ish knew Tanakh, Yoshiber knew Tanakh, Ramosha knew Tanakh. You know what I mean? Like these people, they knew Tanakh. So the fact is supposedly when the Chazon Ish had a discussion with David Ben Gurion and the Chazon Ish, when they got into it, they really got into it, in terms of, because Chazon Ish do stuff also.
But the typical secular Israeli knows and practices much more than the secular North American or possibly European.
It's a good question.
It's not a. It's really more of a statement from my personal experience.
Yeah, the fact is that's the present.
Or it was.
Yes, the fact is that there is a shift in the secular, in what happened to secular Jews over the years, or what you call Zionist Jews over the years. The Zionist Jews who came out of the early Chilonim were very much tied to a certain view of Jewishness, which was tied to Tanakh and not tied to religious practice. Then what happened was there was an influx of Jews who, while not necessarily being frum, had much more of a religious upbringing. Okay, so the point is that you then had this imparting of the religious upbringing. Now the truth is, the Israeli seculars still had the study of Tanakh, so they still had those aspects of. But then what happened was there's a lot more secular Jews who came from, let's say, after the war, when they became secular, but they came out of the Orthodox realm of Poland and so forth and so forth. They were a different type of secular. And of course, you also had the Sephardim, who were very much inundated by Torah teaching, even if they weren't necessarily from. I mean, it's remarkable running into, for example, Sephardi women who are not Shomer Shabbos, but totally keep the laws of mikvah. You know, it's because there's a different. So the truth is, the secular community in Israel is somewhat different. That goes for changes. Then you had the influx of the Soviet Jews, who had no understanding of Jewishness, and that's the issue now with Lieberman. Okay. So the point is, the fact is, though, is what I was really trying to talk about was the fact that it was an example of the issue of how to relate between a Torah community or a Torah understanding of Jewishness and a community that had a different understanding of Jewishness. Whether you call it secular, and also you have to understand there's a difference between reform secular and Zionist secular. Okay, the Reform Judaism was as origins very anti-Israel, very anti-Zionism, which most people don't recognize. The Reform movement was very, very anti-Zionistic. The Reform movement changed with the creation of the State of Israel. But the early Reform rabbis in Europe and especially in America were not fans of Zionism till much, much later. Okay? So what?
Why?
Because the fact is, it's the first riff was, are we a nation or are we a religion? Reform Judaism argued we are a religion. So basically, their understanding of conversion was exactly the same as another religion's understanding of conversion. You convert to my religion. The religion is defined by your belief. You believe in Judaism, you're Jewish. Okay? By the way, it's an interesting issue, like in terms of matrilineal descent decision of Reform Judaism. They defined it in matrilineal terms because of the influence of the peoplehood aspect of Jewish. See, what occurred with the split.
I thought the reform was patrilineal.
Patrilineal, you're right. That's
Okay.
what I meant. Okay, but so even
I was waiting to see where you were going before I said
Yeah,
anything.
yeah.
Okay, but let me try
It accepts actually both.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, okay. So let me really explain what they believe. What happened in the 1800s was a split. Are we a religion or are we a people? If you defined yourself as a people, you went Zionist. Okay? If you defined yourself as a religion, you went Reform. Reform basically said we're religious, and that's why early Reform basically
It was
said...
Orthodox originally, wasn't it?
What?
The original Reform movement.
The Reform movement, it's interesting you find it as Orthodox. it was religious, and then it had to deal with what are you going to do with halacha. So there were mostly early reformers who were trying to argue for a more flexible view of halacha, which, you see, it's interesting watching this because in Europe, conservative Judaism began differently than conservative Judaism in America. Conservative Judaism was a reaction to the reform movement in America. It basically said, no, we can now integrate certain behaviors back into. Okay, it was a movement by individuals who were more orthodox, trying to bring back the reform to be orthodox. In Europe, it was actually an extension of what was called the historical school. What happened with the historical school is that you had issues with halacha and so forth, out of people who were originally orthodox, and then they worked out ways to say how can we be more fluid. Now the people who went all the way in terms of becoming more fluid, they became reform, and they rejected Torah Sinai, they rejected anything like that. Then you had the historical school, and then you had a disagreement about how to view the historical school. In certain ways, they were basically perceived to be from. In certain ways, they were obviously somewhat different than normative from. So, for example, that's what you call the Breslau seminary, and the whole issue of whether Breslau, how do you define it within looking at it from perspective of Orthodox Judaism. So the truth is, a man who was the leader of Breslau was a person by the name of Zachariah Frankel. Now Zachariah Frankel.
This is not related to Breslau Hasidism.
No.
Just want to make that clear.
This is the Breslau, Germany, right? Zachariah Frankel,
The city.
right, walked around with a kapota. You understand, Zachariah Frankel. Now the truth is that Shimshon Fo Hirsch considers Zachariah Frankel to be an apocaris, to be a heretic. Rav Azriel Hildesheimer addressed his letters to a Rav Hagoyin, to a Rav Hagon. In other words, he thought that
He respected him.
He respected him. So the point is, and that's a contention. You have contention to this day. I mean, I remember once talking to a person from England who said Solomon Schechter was a frum guy. Of course he was Orthodox. Solomon Schechter had a JTS. You had issues in JTS between the first graduating class of JTS. One of the first graduates of JTS was Mordechai Kaplan, who obviously became a heretic. The other one was the chief rabbi of England, Rabbi Hertz. He was a graduate of JTS. But the JTS that he went to, it was an issue. Was it Orthodox or not? Solomon Schechter Orthodox or not? A big issue. But the point is because the dividing line over there is very, very hard because there are issues involved. So for example, I read this article about Rabbi Hertz, the chief rabbi of Great Britain, who everyone talks about the Hertz Chumash.
Yeah.
Now a lot of from people look at Hertz Chumash and challenge him because he's quoting from all over the world and so forth. But a lot of people say Hertz obviously was from. Okay, now, so I read this article. There's one new biographer who's trying to say that Hertz really was a conservative rabbi. He really was conservative.
But the conservative rabbis were from back then.
Well, no, the point the argument was Rabbi Hertz had two mentors, one who was clearly from, and the other one most likely was over the line. But he was from. Now the question, this biographer was trying to argue that Rabbi Hertz was really conservative. Whatever it meant. Obviously, not conservative as conservative today, but conservative, be over the line. There was one person who came to defense who basically said, of course Rabbi Hertz was Orthodox. Okay?
And
it was, because you got to get the punchline. Who said this? It was the guy from Art Scroll. Who's one of the publishers of Art Scroll?
Sherman.
And the other one. Who's the other one? Anyways, one of the major publishers of Art Scroll said he's not like our Orthodox. He was sure modern Orthodox. And one of the basic arguments for it is that the head of the Bezdin in England. Okay, and there was the chief rabbi, but there was the Bezdin in England, and basically, and the of Bezdin was what was his name? He was like a big gun. He was I forget his name now, but it was
Not Jacobo.
no, I'm talking before that.
Prior.
Under Rav Hertz. He was considered to be one of the Gedolei Yisrael by the Aguda, by everyone else like that. And Rav Hertz used to sit on his bezdin. So
That was allowed.
this guy
Yeah.
sat there and said he would not let someone who was in front be a member of the bezdin.
Alright.
Sure.
So the point is, there's no doubt about that. But the fact is, that's because conservative. When you talk about the movement, the dividing line between Orthodox and conservative was a little bit different because Orthodoxy itself is a thoughtful idea and so forth. So where do you divide this line and so forth? And you see certain issues and so forth. But the point is that there's obviously a point where it goes way up. But in Europe, this is what I'm talking about. Reform Judaism, the people started, they had been Orthodox, and then you had the secular, the people who went to academics, but they obviously were interested in Jewish because everyone started off Orthodox, and then you started studying and so forth and so forth. So you went this way, you went that way, and so forth and so forth. So Reform went eventually totally outside the pales of Orthodoxy. Okay, but then you still had a lot in between. That was, and the historical school represented that. And then you had the Frum, and the Frum having different arguments how they're going to relate to secular studies and so forth. But the point is that the fact is that it reflects this whole issue. But then the issue arises: is how's the Frum now going to relate to others who are defining Jewishness differently? Now, the major two definitions I was trying to find was religion versus people. So then you had the development, not in Germany, but the development in other aspects of the Jewish world, where basically it became much more Zionistic. And what they argued for is we are a people. So basically they said the religion is orthodoxy, we're rejecting that religion. And we just want to be a people. And that was the early Zionists. Then you had Reform Judaism developing their own religion, but they challenged the idea of peoplehood. They said we have no desire to go back to Jerusalem. That was part of the Reform movement. They took out the idea of return to Jerusalem and return to Israel.
Did
Jewish
they reject that because they felt that to be religion and they were a people?
They rejected it because they wanted to say we were a religion, we're not a people. Our peoplehood is being German. Okay? And the fact is that they basically said we're Germans whose religion is Judaism.
Okay.
Or Reform Judaism. Okay? The point is that most people don't write. And then it became much more complicated in America because the early America actually was Reform Judaism. And the early Reform Judaism was not very Zionistic. They were very anti-Zionist, the early Reform movement in America. But the fact is then you had an influx of other types of Jews who basically saw themselves as a people and religious. We just don't want to do Allah anymore. But the fact is you had this much more mishmash of who we are, which is an inherent problem in terms of defining ourselves. Are we a religion or are we a people? And we take it as such a simple thing. We don't recognize that inherently it's two contradictory definitions of the group. We are a group, and we're defining ourselves through two completely opposite ideas. Now this leads back to the patrilineal descent decision. Patrilineal descent decision, why did they find it? So I remember talking to a Reform rabbi in the 80s about this, senior Reform rabbi, and this older Reform rabbi. He said, do you think we really ever care whether the mother's Jewish or the father's Jewish? There's nothing to do with your patrilineal, because who defines, what really is defined by who your mother is or your father is? It's citizenship, which is tied to peoplehood, right? You're Canadian. It's both with mothers and fathers. So basically, if you're defining peoplehood that way, he says, the way we look at it has nothing to do with who your mother or father is. It's how you were brought up. And he pointed out to me that if a person was born to a Jewish mother, but brought up not Jewishly, then Orthodox Jews would say you're Jewish. Now you may have to do this or that, but you'd be Jewish. In the Reform movement, if you're brought up not Jewish, you aren't Jewish, I don't care who your mother or father was. There was a case a few years back.
So they make them convert.
Absolutely. Because you're not Jewish. Okay? The fact is because and even the word conversion is a problem. Okay, that's one of the problems that I find in terms of Israel. You're having a national identity based upon conversion, which is a religious definition. And the fact is that my problem, there are reasons for it, and I'm not saying that I would change the stance in Israel, but the fact is no one understands the problem. The issue is a difficult issue. Okay, and this is what really confuses a lot of people in terms of Israel. You have one guy who doesn't believe in God, you have another guy who doesn't believe in God. Okay? And this guy's Jewish and this guy's not Jewish. And people say, I don't get it. I'm just like him. We both live the exact same way. He was in Savannah, I was in Savannah, and so forth. And he's not Jewish, but I'm Jewish, but we're both the same. Because the fact is, we don't understand the issues involved. That's a problem in our world today. What am I getting at? This leads to the fact is that we have a problem with defining our group. I'm going to use the word Jewish as a reflection that we are a group that's called Jewish, and we don't discuss the nature of this group enough. We don't really have discussions. We discuss who is a Jew. We don't discuss what is a Jew. The problem with discussing what is a Jew leads to having these issues of understanding how peoplehood, nation and religion combine, and so forth, and how we can try working it out. Then becomes a further issue. And this is really what happened when I started off with Shimshon Hirsch and so forth, is that what is the group, and then why do you want the group this way? In other words, what Shimshon Hirsch was saying was, I have a definition of the group, okay, and if the definition of the group doesn't meet the standard, I don't understand the value of the group. So the point is that I want the group to have a certain value, okay, and if it doesn't have the value, it doesn't have this value, I don't understand the value of the group. And that's a further issue. That's really what the issue of unity is. The question in terms of Jewish unity is, what's the value of the group? Why do you want a group, and why do you want the group to be united? So the argument is, people something like the Rabbi Cook was arguing there's a value in this group, even if they're not being observant, there's a value in the group, even if they're not abiding by Torah principles, there's a value in this group, and therefore we want to keep the group together. But the Rabbi Cook also believed...
The group or the person?
No, the group. That's the point. The group. Shimshon Hirsch also went after the person. He really wanted to bring the people back to Torah. But the point is, he didn't have any patience for any different definition of the group. The Rabbi Cook, he actually believed that these people were reflecting their inner souls and desire to be Jewish, and he also believed that eventually they would come back to Torah. He believed that the Chilunim would eventually come back to Torah because they really...
Pintaliyid, as it were.
What?
The Pintaliyid.
Yes.
That spark would reignite.
And he felt that their desire to work so hard for Eretz Yisrael was a reflection of their Pintaliyid. I don't know if you use that language, maybe you did.
But when you say modern Orthodoxy, do you mean modern Orthodoxy as it is now, the modern Orthodox movement? Or do you mean just in this time period? Or is that a whole other question?
No, the question is in what context. I use that term in a certain context, so you're asking that question what I meant in that context.
Well, because you said that Shimshon Raphael Hirsch was sort of the father of modern Orthodoxy.
Yeah, so the fact is that his modern Orthodoxy was different than the modern Orthodoxy of most people today. Okay? But his definition of modern Orthodoxy was tied to his attitude towards secular studies and a different type of expression of Jewishness, which he felt which was the expression of Jewishness in line with modern thought and a recognition of the values of the world.
Okay.
What shows, really what modern Orthodoxy says is that there are values in this world outside of Torah, and that can be incorporated within Torah. Okay, so Shimshon Hirsch would say, for example, he would read certain poetry and say, this poetry could benefit.
Yeah, or mathematics.
Yeah,
I mean, there's a lot of things you can't do without
mathematics for sure,
mathematics.
but yeah, right, for sure mathematics, but I'm taking it even further
Mhm.
in terms of that. Okay, and other people, and in terms of that idea, but Shimshon Hirsch, and furthermore, Shimshon Hirsch allowed it to affect his behavior in the world to be acceptable within the world's definition. You know, in other words, you know, the Rav talked about having manners. You know, when you eat, should have a fork. You know, he talked about having manners in your behavior because the world respects manners, so you should do it.
Was it the motto of Nativa Torah in Der Eretz?
Their heritage.
That was Shimshon Hirsch's idea.
Yeah.
Okay, the fact is that was the idea. Okay, in terms of secular studies, the big person who believed very strongly in the importance of secular studies was the Vilna Gaon. Okay, it's going to follow. All these terms are really difficult terms, but the fact is, it has a lot to do with how you affect your behavior. You know, the Rav wore a suit. He didn't wear a kapata, right? Because that was okay. You know, the point, the fact is that it's a matter of what you take in from secular society or whatever. But what I'm getting at is, and this is the issue really in terms of unity, is there's a group. It's called the Jewish group, and the question is what constitutes the Jewish group? Is the unity of the Jewish group, which means, okay, how you define the Jewish group, okay, and the
What are
value
the
of that
characteristics
definition.
of that group?
And also,
and how agreed are we upon what those characteristics are?
and what am I going to accept within those characteristics in order to argue for the unity? So the fact is that most people would sit there and say, I am willing to work with Reform rabbis, okay, even though we disagree on basic theological principles, okay, but I am not going to work with Jews for Jesus, okay, because that theological principle is that, although there is a book on the market from the 10 years ago where the person basically says that Messianic Judaism should be seen as another branch of Judaism. Okay, in other words, if you have...
Well, a lot of the members
It's
are
like-
Jewish.
It's
Yeah,
kind of like
so-
saying, it's still my foot even though it's gangrenous. It's still my foot.
Listen, the argument is, this guy's argument was, there's Orthodox, there's conservative, there's Reform, there's Reconstructionist, there's Messianic. And on a certain theological
And
level,
humanistic and others.
right, and if on a certain theological
Renewal.
level, right, if on a certain
Sorry?
theological...
Renewal, Jewish renewal.
Yeah, if on
Never
a
heard
certain,
of
on a certain theological level, okay, if this it's like, why is this theological issue, such as I accept Jesus, why does that cause a problem in terms of?
Because he was Jewish too.
No, no. But the fact is that why is that?
No,
why
it's
what's that? Let me
sorry.
finish my sentence. Why is that? Well, being an atheist is okay. In other words,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
can deny
There's a
the
point there.
existence
To
of
deny
God.
God,
Right. Now, the
There's a
point is,
continuum.
but the point, by the
Well-
way, just on that one
Okay.
point that I can say,
but on what at
Is
what
that-
point does the continuum
question
have
is-
an edge
but
that says it's no longer Judaism?
You're
right,
off
at
it.
that
No,
point,
there's
the point,
another layer
but
to
the
it.
issue is also, it may be that atheism is still better than idolatry. Okay. For
Agnostic?
example,
Right.
no, well, agnostic is a different issue, but the fact is, there's something interesting about that. I once saw, I'll say this. I saw that Rabbi Price, the Reverend Price,
Mhm.
asked the question whether a Noahide is in violation of the Noahide code,
Mhm.
okay, by being an atheist, because in the Noahide
Mm,
code,
mhm.
okay,
Yeah,
there's
believe
an
there's only
issur
one
of
God.
there's an issur of Avodah Zarah. There's a prohibition of idolatry, but there's no call to believe in one God within the Noahide code.
Mhm.
Except that's not so simple either, Rambam and stuff like that. But the fact of the matter is that if the Noachide code is a bunch of don'ts. So if I don't practice idolatry, i.e., I am an atheist, is that in violation of the Noachide code?
Mm.
And Rav Price said that's an interesting question. I saw somewhere else where the Rav basically argues that atheism really is a form of idolatry because no atheist really doesn't believe in God. All atheists have some kind of ethical standards and place one standard over everything else. So when you say, for example, that Stalin is an atheist, he's an atheist because he places his communist values over everything else, which is almost takes the place of God.
Or
Well,
religion,
You
anyway.
could also frame that he's an atheist and he's a communist.
Yeah. Oh, okay. But when I'm saying, well, he's trying to. What Rav is trying to say is that no one is at what God is about is a certain type of acceptance of a certain value. There's no person who's really an atheist because any atheist has a supreme value. And the
I don't
supreme
know
Well,
if
what
that's
is
true.
that
Okay,
expression? There are
that's
no
something- I'm
not sure
atheists
that's true.
In a foxhole.
in the foxhole.
Okay, so the point is, what I'm trying to get at, though, getting back to our issue, is that becomes an issue in terms of Jewish unity, in the sense of what causes Jewish unity, in terms of being, in terms of at what cost Jewish unity, in the sense that if the value of the group. Now, this is what is the value of the group. So the value of the group is only very, 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 simple nationalism. Then what binds the group, and that becomes an issue. Okay, so the point is that
Well, history does.
yeah. So therefore, history but what makes that group really want to hang out, really want to be connected? The fact is once you have values that says this connects the group, then the point is then you get into an issue that wait a second, if you have a value outside. So the truth is that you do have this in the Jewish world, at least the inklings of this question, where for sure we'll sit there and say, you know something, the Messianic Jew, i.e. the Jews for Jesus, is outside the pale.
So this is what I wanted to step in
Yeah.
at. So there's different ways of understanding what makes something outside the pale, just at a high level. One is that, as you add more and more things that are, say, treif, if you will, then at a certain point you become outside the pale. It's like the straw that broke the camel's back, now they're
Yeah.
outside. There's another way of looking at it, and that is that what characteristics does that group have that may be corrosive
Yes.
to the rest of us?
That
So the way we look at Messianics now can be understood as, very parallel to the way we may have looked at atheists 200 years ago.
or you see, to Shimshon Hirsch, he would sit there and say that reform was corrosive.
Yeah.
At the time.
Okay?
Yeah.
And he might even say that today.
Now it's reproaching, though.
Yeah. The point.
It's
point
very
is-
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you have to understand that there's an issue in terms of behavior and underlying theology. So the point is, what you find is that there's a movement back to acceptance of certain ritual mitzvot within the Reform movement,
And
but-
Israel.
but at the same point in time, theology is challenged.
Mhm.
The point is that and it becomes much more complicated. The point is that the question is, or one other question, which I just want to touch upon for a second,
Mhm.
it's the fact is, what is the value of unity? See, the
Mhm.
point is that there is another alternative. This is something people don't recognize. Okay? I said Shimshon Hirsch was willing to say, you go your way, I'll go my way. The truth of the matter is up until the 1700s, that was basically the response of the Jewish world. Okay, there were two examples I'm going to refer to. The truth is there was friction between the Hasidim and the Misnagdim, but eventually they all worked out. But there were two other theological issues that existed within the Jewish world, and the response was generally, you go your way, I'll go my way. One was
Carrots.
what?
Carrots.
One is the Karaites, and
Mm.
one was the early Christians. The question that exists with the early Christians is what happened? I go my way, you go your way, and the fact is should there have been an argument for unity or not unity? It wasn't. Now the truth is there is even an opinion that argues that Saul of Tarsus, who later became known as being told, was actually sent by Chazal to get the Christians out of the Jewish community. You the early Christians, because the early Christians were observant, okay, and they had this certain attitude towards Jesus. So there's an argument that says that Chazal basically said, we don't want to deal with this within the Jewish world. Let them go somewhere else, and that's why Christianity really took up in Asia Minor, and Paul really sold it to non-Jews, okay. That's why Thomas Paine used to have this question. When Thomas Paine, who was one of the fathers of American independence, one of the early fathers, he was challenged for not being a good Christian, and he basically said, okay, I'm just doing what the Jews. I'm following the Jews. Where Jesus existed was where the Jews were. None of the Jews accepted him. They accepted him up in Asia Minor, but we actually showed. So therefore, I think I'll do what the people actually saw who were there. They didn't accept him, so I'm not accepting him either. Okay, the point is that the argument, and that's really what happened, except in Asia Minor. But there is an opinion. I forget who it was, but there is an opinion. Might have been Rav Yaakov Enden. Was talking, but a minority opinion, but not some significant, who basically said that Chazal wanted to get the Hebrew Christians out of the Jewish community. That's one possibility. The second, right? You're right. The second possibility is the Karaites, and here you see a very different opinion, a very different definition. How do you relate to the Karaites? So in Egypt, right, where there was a large Karaite community, the rabbinate Jews, right, basically tried to maintain a close relationship with the Karaite Jews. I read somewhere that even was intermarriage between the two groups. The point is there was an attempt at some type of connection, so forth and so forth. In the other area where there were a lot of Karaites, which was the Crimea, okay, that's where there were a lot of Karaites. Okay, so let me just tell you how what happened to the Jewish community in where Karaites existed in Europe. Okay, let me just make this one statement because I think it'll be worthwhile. When the Nazis came to the Crimea, okay, they came across this group of people who acted somewhat like Jews, but didn't really act like Jews. These Karaites, they didn't know how to respond. So they went to the Jews and say, "Are they Jews?" Now the Jews said, "No, they're not Jews. They're Karaites." Okay, so therefore the Karaites were left alone by the Nazis. Okay, now
even though they were of Jewish parentage,
well,
presumably.
the fact is that the issue comes out that the point was, were the Jews doing it because why should they suffer? But the truth of the matter is the Ashkenazic position on the Karaites was basically they're outside the Jewish community to the extent that the Ramah held that every Karaite was a mamzer. Okay, and therefore the Karaites couldn't even re-enter the Jewish community.
Oh my!
Okay,
They had to marry each other.
That they couldn't even do because it wasn't. They were basically totally ostracized from the Jewish community. If you go your way, I go my way. You have your own rule. I have nothing to do with that. The fact of the matter is that raises the issue of what issue was it. So the point is, you might like your term. It might be they felt that was so corrosive. But what I'm trying to get at is an issue that has always bothered in terms of Jewishness. I just want to make this final statement. Okay, that's what I used to say. The question is, where does the value of Jewish unity come from? So the fact is, the Gemara in Bracha says, that the same way Jews have tefillin, God has tefillin. And what pasuk is in God's tefillin? Okay, so what I'm trying to say is that there's an interesting aspect over here. That it says God wears tefillin. So what are the psukim in God's tefillin? So one of the psukim in God's tefillin is Shem Echad. God is one. What's a pasuk in God? That's in the our tefillin. What's in God's tefillin? So God's tefillin is devoted to the praise of Am Yisrael, right? Because all of the psukim in the tefillin are about God, the importance of God,
to remind us and to remind him.
And so he has psukim in Eretz Yisrael to tell you the importance of Eretz Yisrael in terms of filling God's world. And one of the psukim
You
And
said
so-
Eretz Yisrael, but you meant Am Yisrael.
Am Yisrael.
Because now
Right,
you're getting
right,
into the
right.
dichotomy, right?
Because the point is that it says over there, okay, it's a verse, it's actually a verse, I think they're referring to a verse from Devar Yamin, but it's a similar verse, that's the same verse in Shmuel Beis. It says, Mika Amcha Yisrael, Goy Echad Ba'aretz. So the fact is Echad could be doing as unique or united. Now the fact of the matter is there's a value in the unity of Eretz Yisrael, the unity of the Jewish people, because the Jewish people bring together all these different values like this. That's why the 12 Shvatim are so significant. They bring together things in terms of creating a unity, and that's the value of Jewish unity in the sense that we're supposed to come together. Now the truth is I just want to finish with this point, is that's actually tied to an issue of how the kingdom of Yehuda related to the kingdom of Israel. Okay, Yehoshaphat, who was the king of Yehuda, who was the righteous king of Yehuda, the son of Asa Melch, who was also a righteous king of Yehuda, he made a pact to go to war, not to fight with, like to make a unity in fighting with Achav.
An alliance.
Achav was the king of Israel and is recognized as one of the major evil kings of the Jewish world. Achav's wife was, of course, Jezebel. So the point is that all Israel, Yehoshua made a peace pact with Achav to go to war against another person and so forth. So there's some idea. So there's issues about what does that mean. There's other psukim that sit there and say Yehoshaphat was wrong. He shouldn't have related to such a Russia. There's that idea. In other words, Jewish unity, combining the two kingdoms, there had to be a separation. It wasn't good. But there are other people who try to say that
phone's
there
almost
was.
full.
Okay. So it's always, so the point is, it's part of the issue, and it really applies in Eretz Yisrael, where really we got to talk, what is a nation, what is Jewishness, how we come together, and so forth. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this.
Shkoyach.
Shkoyach.
Okay, you want to turn it
And
off?
off.